Welcome back to Coppers and Brass, and this is the 6th and final episode in the second series. Over the last 12 programmes we've been looking at a wide range of issues to do with Irish traditional music, and I suppose we've kept the good stuff to the end because this is about etiquette at sessions. It's an issue that is controversial, often talked about but rarely discussed, and if you think that's a paradox, I have the right man to explain it all to us. He is the proprietor of the Cobblestones, a bar that has music 7 days a week and quite a few afternoons, none other than Tom Mulligan. Tom, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Good to see you.
You're going to help me with this big subject, are you?
We'll see where we go.
We'll have a look at it. Before we do, though, let's have a look at a few other views on etiquette in sessions.
I've heard a lot of it. The London pub's been really significant in the whole sort of area of the first time that traditional music is performed in the pub. It's now assumed that it's almost like ageless, that people have been playing Irish music and traditional music in pubs forever, but it's not. It's 1960s. And Dublin as well. The Dubliners were significant in bringing ballads and songs into pubs, so I imagine the pub session is an urban phenomenon to start with that has mutated into the country, even though that wouldn't be popularly appreciated by people at all.
Sessions were sparse enough at the time. It weren't a big number of musicians, and I suppose we played with street sessions. We would have played in small bars. The difference now is the bars have got bigger and you can get more people into them, which is the downside of it. Is you get more, I suppose, should be listeners into it, and it's usually more noise that comes in. And I suppose even the size of the session has increased. We were always playing with the older musicians, and you'd be sitting waiting for them to drop a gem or two of new tune or something you missed. Whereas now the session seems to be more a social gathering of people, sometimes just mindlessly playing reels from one end of the day to the next, which it doesn't have the same enjoyment, I suppose. It doesn't have the same variety, and I think for a listening point of view, it's not as interesting as when somebody can break it with a song and either play a barn dance or dance a bit of a set. They've sort of stratified the whole thing. It's either set dancing, music or song, and whereas in my youth, it was all happening around at the same time.
There is this misconception, I think, that a session is a completely kind of open invitation to anybody to kind of join in, including somebody that can tap a bottle with a coin, or that can that can go out and buy a barrel and just sit into a session the next day.
There's definitely a bit of etiquette where you should kind of sit down and kind of be invited to play a tune, play along with what they're playing, but if you're going to go starting tunes off, you kind of need to be sort of invited in a way.
Well, I remember talking about session etiquette. I was lying in a bed one day in the west coast of America, and I picked up a leaflet and I was saying session etiquette, and I started laughing at the idea of it. And I read through it, and it was all the things that we would have taken for granted. When you arrive at a session, you sort of check it out. You're welcomed in. Obviously, it's your peer group. If you're obviously one of the better musicians but more fun than others, you might be encouraged into the centre of the circle sooner than somebody else would. Also, you sort of be aware of the balance that you take your place in a I suppose a hierarchical mode, in that the senior musicians or the most respected musicians would be given the opportunity to start most or many of the tunes, and you'd always taken from the other side. If you're leading a session yourself, you're not expected to lead every set, but you would encourage others to take off at various times. Sometimes people take that as a nod to take on a solo performance and to stand on the shoulders of others and perform, solo pieces endlessly.
I've seen, especially at Flower Kells, this kind of mad thing about, this kind of obsession with joining into a session. I've seen people get up and go and buy a drink, and while they're gone, somebody sat in their seat, which is just, it's an outrageous way to behave. It's guerrilla tactics. It's like there are varying approaches depending on your level of your level of diplomacy, I suppose. And they vary from the extreme end, which I won't go into detail, but it usually involves expletives, to trying to be subtle and trying to hint to people that they're not quite, doing it the right way. And see, the problem is sessions, you don't want to seem elitist about it, because, traditional music does do its best not to be elitist, you know.
It's often in the personality of the person. People with a good judge of character and a good social understanding will be aware that they're welcome to play for a while and then moves on to somebody else, and that's the beauty of it.
I have a nice story about Paddy Killory, who's a local fiddle player, and he was playing years ago in a pub called Comers with Tommy Peoples, and he was well into his 70s now at this stage, and he's gone a bit deaf, and I suppose he was a bit shaky, and the fiddle was completely out of tune, you know. So rather than Tommy saying, "Give me an A there, Paddy," or, you know, "You're out of tune," or "You're flat," he just waited for Paddy to go to the toilet, and when Paddy was gone to the toilet, he tuned up his fiddle. So when he came back from the toilet, they were just playing spot on, lovely music.
Probably the elite of the musicians of this world, and that I would consider the elite. I've played with them all, and my own personal elite, I've played with them, and they're the nicest people in the world, and they're the most inclusive people in the world. It's more often than not the musician that's a step below them. That's the lad that'll have a problem with certain people, and that's the lad that'll create problems in a session. When you get to the top level, like I hopefully strive to get to, they're the real musicians, and music is about making friends, and it's lads that are a rung below that, might have a little chip on their shoulder because of that. They're the ones that can create a problem, that make people see. It's a lot easier to include people.
For me to sit down with non-professional musicians, it's never an issue, and they don't have an issue either, because they know that the basic love for the music is what you're there for, and you're not going to be grandstanding and taking over a thing as a gig. You take your place in the session as you always did, and I think it's a sort of an agreement, a sort of a gentleman's agreement, for want of a better word, that everybody leads and everybody takes a turn, but everybody listens.
Tom, plenty of interesting views there, and we'll come back to them in a second. But before we do, maybe you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background,
Indeed,
your musical background in particular.
I got involved in the pub business maybe 30 years ago in Blackrock in County Louth, when
I remember it well.
Myself and my brother Alfie moved there for a time. We were there for 4 to 5 years, and then I came to Dublin. Alfie is still in Dundalk, but we had music there. Some of the people that you were
Gerry
talking
O'Connor,
about, Gerry O'Connor,
regular,
Desi Wilkinson, they were all playing there. So it was top class music. I come from a family of musicians. My father was a fiddle player and piper from Leitrim. Brothers Neely and Alfie and Gerry, who are pipers as well.
Pipers, yeah.
All their children play music, and my own do as well. And we encounter music 7 days a week now, whether we want it or not, you know. So we do see quite a lot of music, and quite a lot of good music, and we encounter etiquette along the way as well.
Well, Tom, you are, as you say, you're in an ideal position. I think you've sessions 7 nights a week and quite a few afternoons.
Indeed.
And there's a wide variety of issues that have been raised there. But what are the main issues from your perspective? What are the things that work well at sessions and what doesn't work well, and what causes annoyance?
Yeah, well, for starters, you need somebody that is who is directing the session for starters, and usually that's an anchor man or woman on any given session, or if it's an impromptu session, it's somebody that starts it and they know what they're on about. The main requirement to sit in on a session is an ability to play along with the people who are running the session. Like, you have to have a certain amount of ability, and you cannot hope to do your practicing in the session, because it ruins it for everybody. So the first requirement would be that you would have a certain ability.
But what happens if my opinion of my ability isn't what's necessary, and I come in assuming that I'm great?
Yeah.
And I'm not. Who then says, Tommy, you're not really up to it and you're ruining the session? Yeah. How does that get dealt with?
Well, I think, you know, any musician knows their ability. A visiting musician to a session may encounter, he may have a different repertoire of music for starters. He may join in some of the sets. He may not be able to join in some of the sets. And particularly if you were coming from a completely different atmosphere, say you played your music in America or England or Germany, it may be a different format. It may be like in England, you would have a session entails everyone playing a solo piece, and they go round the house again in the second time. But a session in Ireland is kind of unique in that way, and the ability to play and to be seen,
But Tom, I know, I accept the theory, we both agree on that, but you know better than I do that it happens that someone comes in and who is seriously flawed and actually can ruin it for good musicians.
Yeah, well,
and
it's self-evident.
Well, it's self-evident, but who's responsible to save the night for everybody else? Who's going to say to that person quietly, or does it happen, or do you allow that?
Well, it has happened. It has happened in the past. If somebody is not up to it, they have been told, well, now you hold on there a minute and we'll get you to play. Maybe we'll give them a chance to play on their own or something. But, you can't have one individual ruining the session for the rest. It's what I said earlier on. You have to be in a position. You can't do your practicing in a session. It has to be done before you come in. And it is generally up to whoever's leading the session. If it's going downhill, it's bad for their reputation to be chairing a
I want to come back to that in a wee bit more detail, but talking about the Cobblestones and Sessions, let's go back over across the river now, and we'll have a look at a few tunes been played by Dahi Kearney and some of the students from Dundalk Institute of Technology, and they're playing tunes written by Josephine Keegan from South Armagh. So let's take a break and enjoy some of the music at the Cobblestones.
Great stuff. So we're going to play 2 jigs this time, again by Josephine Keegan, around and about, and the thingy jig. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, Tom, you recognise that place.
I indeed do. Indeed I do.
Eat, sleep and live in it day out. Tom, you're in a great vantage point, as I was saying earlier. What are the main issues, do you think, around sessions and etiquette and things not going right?
Well, generally the melody is, it's without doubt the melody, is the mainstay of the session. And competent musicians, they just gel well together. Yeah. It's when they introduce, it's grand when there's one person back in the rhythm, but when a second one comes in, again, like the bowron, one bowron is sufficient in any session because people are working on different rhythms in their head. And if you even watch tapping of feet in sessions, you will see possibly the melody part of it, they're all tapping in rhythm, but then if you go further afield, even if you look at the audience, they're all on a different beat. And particularly if they bring hand clapping into it, the place goes.
Is hand clapping a no-no for musicians?
Jesus, big time.
Christy Muir doesn't like it.
No, he doesn't like it. He's not the only one that doesn't like it.
A lot of people don't.
But
like
it's when the rhythm, you can get a great guitar player and he adds to it. You get a great bowron player, adds to it. But when you bring in another rhythm, and like there's the particularly flat holes where you would see 3 and 4 bowrons in the session, and some of them are playing gently enough that you don't even, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you have a couple of strong people playing rhythm and a couple of strong people working the beat on the bowron, it can actually ruin it, it can make it.
What about, Tom, sometimes you have a session of great players and there's a dominant player, maybe dominant to the extent of really kind of taking over the whole agenda. I'm thinking of you've had people like Seamus Tansey playing in sessions in the pubs. Now Seamus is a big character.
Well, he would dictate it, yes.
And is there any way, if you've got a player who is dictating, musicians can find that useful, but some musicians can find it a wee bit overbearing. So who deals with that? How would you handle Seamus Tansey?
Well, when you see it, I think the best thing you can do with Seamus is row in, because there isn't. He's a full force personality, and his music is the same, and he is worth listening to.
He's a magnificent player,
Yeah, the man is like he's getting older now and all that, and maybe he hasn't the same puff that he had 25, 30 years ago, but he's still a fantastic flute player. And there's dominant musicians like that, and they're worth. Other musicians acknowledge their dominance maybe, and their legacy. It can excite them,
Sometimes young players don't even know who Seamus Tansey is or Tommy Peebles. I find young people. And how do you encourage young people to pay respect to people like that?
Yeah, well, you tell them before they go in. Like we have an icon here tonight that
should be respected.
I was listening to Brian Rooney last night on a recording of him, and there's a great man now, it's just like, the stuff that he plays, it's
incredible, absolutely incredible. And wouldn't you hate to hear him wasted in between 10 or 15 musicians who are moving at slightly different paces, and 3 or 4
like 1 or 2 musicians would compliment him. He has proved that in his recordings and his live broadcasts and his live performances,
Well, Tom, unfortunately we're coming to an end. Is there any other reflections that you want to leave us with before we...
In etiquette, etiquette is just manners, really. And
that's a nice way of putting it up.
Everybody knows what manners are, and when you walk into a strange place, like you do everyone the courtesy of acknowledging them and asking, if you ask to join a session, you'll be welcomed in. If you just plough ahead, you might get the hackles up with people, but most sessions, and 99.99% of the sessions, will welcome anybody that comes in, introduces themselves and asks permission to join. And they're encouraged, they are encouraged, and that's where music soars. It's when it's all played together and played in unison and played at a nice pace, played, where everyone is in harmony. And that's manners on a plate,
Common sense,
manners, that's all it's about.
Tom, thanks a million for coming in, and keep up the good work down the Cobblestones.
We'll do that.
Next time I get a tap on the shoulder, I've broken the etiquette somewhere, and Big Tom's after me. Anyway, that was Tom Mulligan, and I think a very appropriate way to end up not just the second series, but the whole 2 series, 12 programmes that we've been doing on Irish traditional music. I'd like to thank all of the staff, all of the volunteers, the musicians who took part, our studio audiences, and everyone associated with the programme. It's been a great journey of exploration for me personally, and I think most people involved in it enjoyed it, and hopefully we can come back again and do it soon. In the meantime, keep playing, keep it the music. Goodbye.